At 2:17 a.m., the city clock reversed, and so did the ache in my chest. I was awake, half by habit, half by the thin, metallic whine threaded through the night, and I watched the great hands of St. Aurelia's Tower unhook from time and creep backward. I'd spent a year cataloging mysteries for other people, but this one reached into my room, tugged my sheets, and whispered my name. My name is Mara Ives, and I never wanted to be a detective. I wanted to fix watches. I wanted small truths that tick. For a long minute, the world unspooled. The neon pharmacy sign outside my window swallowed its light and gave it back in reversed syllables. A tram bell clanged, unclanged, then held its breath. Even the bruise on my forearm softened into pale skin, like a tide had rolled away. Then everything snapped forward again, as if the city had blinked and pretended nothing happened. The next sound was a knock on my door, the kind you feel in your bones. When I opened it, a man about 60 stood there wearing an overcoat the color of late tea and a smile that had seen too many funerals. He removed his hat as if he were entering a church. "Ms. Ives?" he asked, already knowing I was. "I'm Caspar Bell. I believe your mother instructed me to come when the clocks began to misbehave." My mother had been dead 11 months. Even so, the room smelled suddenly like lemon oil and solder. Caspar stepped inside without touching anything. He gazed at my workbench, where a disassembled pocket watch lay in a tray like a silver vertebrae. "Time," he murmured, "is an instrument with 1,000 strings. Few learn how to tune even one." "Start over," I said, and my voice was steadier than my hands. "What did you mean by misbehave?" "St. Aurelia moved backward," he said simply. "Which means the atlas has been opened." "The what?" "The clockmaker's atlas," he said, and the phrase rippled through the air, settling into the room like a secret chair waiting at the table. "A map not of places, but of moments. Your mother was one of its custodians. So am I, though I am not half so brave." I laughed once, a brittle noise. My mother repaired mantel clocks and argued with the radio. She made stew that could stop wars. She did not. I gestured vaguely at the window, at the tower that ruled our skyline and our sleep, own maps of time. "Not own," he corrected. "Guard. The atlas shows where time thins, where it can wrinkle, pool, or be persuaded. Someone has opened it, Ms. Ives, and not for the good of anyone I'd care to meet." A train sighed across the river. I thought of the backward minute, of the bruise that had unwritten itself and my grief loosening, just for a breath, like a glove unbuttoned. Caspar reached into his coat and produced a key. It was bronze and humming, and when he set it on my bench, my disassembled pocket watch ticked once, though it had no mainspring. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Only what you already are," he said. "A person who listens to small truths that tick. The atlas will answer to you. It answered to your mother before you. I don't know how." "You will," he said, and for the first time his smile wasn't a funeral. "But we must go now, before the second backward minute arrives. Doors open on the first, and monsters step through on the second." I put on my coat. The key was warm in my palm, like it had been waiting there all my life. Caspar and I moved through the city like midnight ink through paper. The streets had that washed-out look they get after rain, shiny with old secrets. St. Aurelia's Tower kept watch above the roofs, stern and pale, and for a moment I felt 14 again, racing my mother's shadow up the hill to prove that I could breathe thinner time without getting dizzy. I never won. She always laughed and touched the clock stones as if greeting an old dog. "Why me?" I asked as we climbed the steps to the tower. My breath came in small clouds, fear trims the lungs. "Because you still listen for the exact second a kettle begins to sing," Caspar said. "Because grief made you precise instead of cruel." The tower door was oak and iron and older than truth. He pressed his palm to a patch of worn wood, then nodded at the key in my hand. The bronze teeth were warm, then hot, then humming, a vibration that slipped under my skin and tickled the little bones of my wrists. I fitted it into a lock so ordinary I'd never noticed it, and the tumblers inside responded like a flock turning as one. The door didn't swing, it sighed. We stepped into a spiral stair so narrow the walls seemed to touch my shoulders. We climbed. I counted steps, the way I always do, and the numbers felt skittish, like they didn't want to be arranged in order. At the first landing, a narrow window looked east over the river. The water ran black and smooth, except for one patch near the old bridge where it rippled backward against itself, like a muscle caught in a cramp. "That's a thin place," Casper said softly. "The atlas marks it. When the second backward minute comes, that patch will become a door." "To where?" He gave me the sort of look a person gives a match just before striking it. "To a moment that ended badly. Some people can't resist trying to revise their lives." We climbed again. The second landing held a fresco that time had peeled with patient fingers. It showed a circle of figures around a table. They all wore aprons darkened by oil and soot. Tools glittered like constellations between their hands, pliers, tweezers, files fine as eyelashes. The face at the edge of the circle made my heart misstep. My mother, younger than the last time I saw her, eyes bright with the mischief she saved for difficult gears. "I thought she hated being photographed," I whispered. "She preferred being remembered," Casper said. "The Atlas custodians painted themselves instead. Paint argues less than cameras." The third landing wasn't a landing at all, but a room like the inside of a bell. In the center stood a metal lectern, all ribs and rivets, more engine than furniture. Upon it lay the atlas. I expected leather and dust. What waited was thin as a stack of moth wings, pages of translucent brass etched with lines that pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat seen through skin. Every etched curve was a vein of motion. Every dot was a wound or a wish. When I brought my hand near, the lines brightened and rearranged, pivoting around some secret logic until a map of our city assembled itself, river like a dark snake, streets a nest of wire, the tower a bright thorn. "There," Casper said, tapping a place where the river knot flickered. "And there." He touched Saint Aurelia itself, and the thorn burned brighter. "Someone has pried at both." The pages shivered. A hairline crack ran through the brass, a fracture that did not belong. I traced it with a fingertip and heard something far away laugh without sound. "Who?" I asked. Casper's jaw tightened. "There are names for them. Borrowers. Editors. Cutters. I think this time it's the cutter known as Winterloo. He unthreads minutes to sell the thread." "Sell time?" "By the inch," he said. "To the desperate." The tower deepened around us, stone remembering storms. Outside, a tram rang once, twice, and then its note curled backward into itself. My skin prickled. "The second backward minute," I said. Casper nodded. "We need to stitch the river knot before he pulls it open. If he makes a gate there, the current will drag hours from anyone who looks down." "How do I stitch a river?" "The same way you fix a watch," he said, and put the atlas into my arms. It was heavier than it looked, like a lap full of sleeping cats. "With attention. With names." The hum and the key rose until my teeth sang. Far below, water changed its mind. The stone underfoot ticked like a cooling pan. When we stepped back onto the stair, shadows folded in along the walls. They were not ours. I did not look at them. I looked at the atlas, at the bright knot by the bridge, and I said my mother's name inside my chest the way you would say a charm. The tower breathed in. It began to breathe out. "Run," Casper said, and we did, the key hot as a coal in my fist. We burst from St. Aurelia's door into air that was too still for a city. Not quiet, no, the tram still clanged, the river still hissed against its stone banks, but still in the way of a held breath, waiting for the second backward minute to choose a direction. The atlas was heavy in my arms, the bronze pages whispering against one another with each stride I took. Caspar ran ahead, coat flaring behind him like a signal flag. We pounded downhill toward the old bridge, its stone spine arching over the black water. The closer we came, the louder the hum in the key became, until I swore it was in my teeth, vibrating each word I might have spoken. The thin place in the river was easy to see now. Where the rest of the current flowed east, this patch folded back on itself, churning without foam, as if time there was both coming and going. It was the size of a doorway, and it pulsed faintly, matching the beat of my own heart. "Open the atlas," Caspar called over his shoulder. I knelt at the river's edge, setting the book across my knees. The knot glowed on the brass page, lines shifting and curling as though impatient. My mother's name came to my lips without thought, and the knot on the page swelled in response. The water ahead of us shimmered, an image bleeding into it like ink into cloth. It was a street I recognized, but not as it was now. The buildings stood taller, cleaner. A horse-drawn cart rattled past. And there was a girl in a blue coat, her face hidden by the tilt of her hat. She turned, and the ache in my chest doubled. It was my mother, maybe 17, stepping into that impossible water. Caspar's hand clamped on my shoulder. "Don't. She's not for you to save. The cutter uses bait." The shimmer deepened, shadows moved inside it. One of them stepped forward, a tall man in a pale coat, his hair white as frost, his smile the kind that could make you forget he'd stolen from you. Winterloo. He carried no tools, but the air around him trembled as if cut and spliced into pieces too small to see. "Mara Ives," he said, and the sound of my name in his voice felt like a thread being pulled through me. "Your mother always said you'd take her place. You could do better. You could edit, not merely repair." The backward minute began. The city's light twisted, the bridge stones warmed under my palms. The river's knot pulled, inviting. Caspar shoved a small satchel into my hands. Inside were a needle finer than breath, a spool of black thread, and a square of glass etched with tiny numbers. "Stitch it closed," he said. "Don't listen to him. He can't take what you don't give." Winterloo's voice softened, almost kind. "Imagine undoing the day she died. You could keep her. Just leave this door a little open." The key in my pocket burned like it might brand me. My fingers shook as I threaded the needle, dipped the point into the atlas page where the knot burned brightest. The thread sank in with no resistance, stitching brass to brass, moment to moment. Each loop made the river shimmer less, the image fading like breath on glass. Winterloo stepped closer, but each stitch slowed him, as though I were sewing the air around him shut. The final knot in the thread tightened with a sound like a watch snapping closed. The shimmer winked out. The river flowed forward again. Winterloo was gone. Or perhaps he had never been there. Caspar exhaled hard, relief sharp in his breath. "First repair's the worst. You did well." I didn't answer. My eyes were on the water, where only darkness remained, but my hands still remembered the warmth of the girl in the blue coat, so close I could have reached her. We didn't go back to the tower right away. Caspar led me through narrow alleys behind shuttered shops, where the cobblestones were worn into soft hollows by centuries of feet. The atlas, closed now, had cooled in my arms, though it still seemed to hold a faint pulse, like a sleeping animal. "You're thinking about her," Caspar said without looking back. I didn't deny it. That wasn't just bait. It was her. My mother. "Moments are real, even when they're stolen," he said. "The cutters don't deal in illusions, they deal in truths twisted to their own ends. That's why they're dangerous." We emerged into a courtyard where the air smelled faintly of oil and brass. At its center stood a clock unlike any I'd seen, wide-faced, mounted low to the ground, its hands missing entirely. Instead, There was a shallow dish of water set into the clock center, and from it dripped a steady trickle of red. The water should have swallowed it, diluted it, but the red stayed intact, curling like smoke. Caspar crouched beside it. "This," he said, "is a wound in time. A cutter's work. Fresh." The sight made my skin crawl. The drip was steady, as though from a cut that would never clot. "What does it mean?" "It means something's been taken from this hour," he replied. "And if we don't seal it, the absence will spread." The atlas opened in my hands without me willing it. The brass page showed a circular mark where the wound sat, bleeding crimson light. Around it, the lines of the city's time map wavered, blurring. "What do I do?" Caspar pointed at the needle and thread still tucked in my satchel. "Same as before. But this will fight you harder. Cutters leave teeth behind." I knelt beside the clock. The first stitch slid in easily, but the second caught on something that wasn't there, resistance like a rope pulled tight. The drip in the dish paused, then resumed faster, spattering my hands. The air thickened. A shadow pooled at the far wall, detaching from the stone like wet paper peeling away. It took shape, a thin figure with two long arms, its head tilted as if listening to a sound only it could hear. Caspar's voice was low. "That's a hound. It follows the scent of fresh edits. Don't stop." My needle moved faster, looping black thread through brass and shadow alike. The hound crept closer, its joints bending wrong, each step making the air colder. My breath turned to mist. "Caspar." "Stitch," he barked. The final loop cinched tight, and the wound closed with a low, wet sound. The red in the dish faded, replaced by clear water. The hound froze, head cocked, then stepped backward into the wall and was gone. The atlas page smoothed itself, lines crisp again. My hands, though, still trembled, and the key in my pocket was ice. Caspar offered me a flask. "Drink. That was your first hound. Won't be your last." I drank. The liquid was bitter, metallic, but it steadied me. Above us, somewhere deep in the city, a bell rang, not the hour, but something older, stranger. Caspar's eyes narrowed. "That's not Saint Aurelia," he said. "Something else is waking." The bell sound rolled through the city like a tide pushing against its banks. It was low, almost gentle, yet I felt it in my teeth, the same way I'd felt the backward minute. Caspar stiffened as though someone had whispered his true name. "That's the Orpheum bell," he said. "And it hasn't rung in 70 years. The name meant nothing to me, but the way he said it made the hairs along my arms rise. "What's the Orpheum bell?" He started walking fast, forcing me to keep up. "It's not a clock. It's an anchor. Built to keep one very specific moment from slipping loose. If it's ringing, that anchor is failing." The streets tilted downward toward the southern quarter. It was a part of the city I barely knew, narrow, arched lanes overgrown with ivy, the windows shuttered even in daylight. The sound of the bell seemed to grow thicker here, as if the air itself were carrying its weight. When we turned a final corner, I saw it, a small stone tower, hunched like a sentinel at the end of an overgrown square. Vines had climbed its sides, but at the top, half hidden in the leaves, a great bronze bell swayed slowly on its beam. With each swing, the air shuddered. Caspar's face was pale. "If this breaks, the moment inside will spill into every street in the city. And if winter loos behind it." I didn't let him finish. "What's inside the moment?" He hesitated. "A death. One that's not allowed to change." The atlas warmed in my arms and opened itself, pages riffling until one stopped under my gaze. It showed the Orpheum bell's location, and in its center, a black flower-shaped mark. From each petal, thin threads of time stretched out, trembling. "What do I do?" I asked. Caspar handed me the glass square from before. "This time, You'll need to look at the moment before you can stitch it. The glass will show you what's inside the anchor. But don't stare too long, it'll pull. I lifted the glass, aligning it with the bell. The world inside it was not the same as the one around me. Instead of the square and the vines, I saw a wide street lined with gas lamps, their light flickering in a heavy fog. At the center of the street stood a man in a long coat, holding a pocket watch. Opposite him was a woman, my breath caught, my mother again, older than in the river vision but younger than I remembered her. She looked afraid. The man spoke, though I couldn't hear him. My mother shook her head. He reached toward her, and then, impossibly, time around them stopped. Even the fog froze, mid-swirl. A cold hand closed around my wrist. Caspar yanked the glass down. That's enough. Now you know what you're protecting. I swallowed hard. I can stitch it from here. You'll have to climb to the bell's mouth. Anchor repairs need to be made at the heart. The climb was brutal. The stone steps inside the tower were damp and slippery, spiraling tighter the higher I went. The bell's deep pulse shook the air in my chest. When I reached the top, I could see the city spread out below, rooftops catching the weak light of the lamps. I set the atlas on the wooden beam beside the bell. The black flower mark quivered, as if sensing my presence. I took up the needle and thread, feeling the resistance at once, like sewing through something that wanted to live. The bell's ringing grew uneven, desperate. Halfway through the stitch, the air shifted. Winterloo stood in the tower doorway, one hand resting on the beam. "You're repairing a death that should never have happened," he said softly. "You could let it go. You could give her another year. Another day." My throat was dry. And who would lose it instead? He smiled without answering. The key in my pocket seared my leg. My mother's name sat on my tongue, but I didn't speak it. I pulled the last stitch tight. The black flower on the atlas folded in on itself and vanished. The bell stopped ringing. The city exhaled. When I looked up again, Winterloo was gone. By the time we climbed down from the Orpheum Bell, the city had changed. Not in any way I could name, no missing streets or strange skies, but in the way it felt. The air had a kind of listening quality now, as though every cobblestone and shuttered window was aware of us. Caspar moved fast, as if speed could keep him ahead of whatever was following. 2 breaches in one night means there's a third, he said. Cutters work in triplets, they weaken the weave in 3 places before pulling the thread. The atlas was already opening in my hands before I asked, "Where's the third?" The brass pages shifted, showing 2 marks already sewn shut, the river knot and the bell's flower. Between them, at the heart of the map, a new mark had appeared, a circle surrounded by what looked like teeth. I didn't recognize the place at first, until the lines around it sharpened. "That's the market square," I said. "But there's nothing there at night." Caspar's mouth tightened. "There will be now." We reached the square just after midnight. The stalls were shuttered, the cobblestones slick with fog. The fountain at the center dripped lazily. But something was wrong with the shadows. They didn't cling to the ground, they leaned, as if drawn toward the fountain's base. The atlas's mark pulsed faster in my hands. I knelt, holding it up to the fountain. The teeth weren't just a symbol. Up close, I saw they were clocks. Tiny ones, half buried in the stone, each with a single jagged hand spinning too fast to read. "What are they?" I whispered. "Time leechers," Caspar said. "They latch on to moments and drink them dry." I reached for the needle, but the moment the thread touched the nearest clock, it screamed. Not a sound, more like a pressure in my skull, sharp enough to make my vision blur. The other clocks began spinning faster, their shadows stretching. Figures began to crawl from those shadows, thin and jerking, each with a clock face where its head should be. Their hands spun wildly, no 2 in sync. Caspar stepped between me and the nearest one, pulling something from his coat, a long, flat key with no teeth. He pressed it to the creature's clock face. The spinning slowed, then stopped, and the shadow body collapsed into smoke. "Keep stitching." My hands moved without thought, thread pulling through stone and shadow, binding the clocks to stillness. Each stitch made the air colder, and each creature that collapsed left a faint smell of burnt metal. The atlas page began to smooth, teeth blunting, the mark shrinking. The last clock creature reached me before I could finish. Its spinning hands flickered, catching my reflection again and again, 100 versions of me, some older, some younger. One of them was laughing with my mother. For half a breath, I faltered. Caspar's shout snapped me back. "Don't give it your eyes." I drove the needle home. The final stitch closed, the teeth on the atlas vanishing. The creature dissolved, taking all those other versions of me with it. The fountain dripped in silence. The shadows lay flat again. My hands ached as if I'd been sewing for days. Caspar looked at me with something like relief, but it was heavy relief, the kind that knows the night isn't over. "3 breaches," he said quietly. "Now the weave will hold. For a while." I glanced at the atlas. The brass was unmarked now, but the pages felt warmer, heavier. "For a while?" He met my eyes. "Until Winterloo finds another thread to pull." We walked in silence toward Caspar's workshop, the atlas closed against my chest. The city was quiet again, but it was not the comfortable quiet of sleep, it was the quiet of something holding its breath. Caspar unlocked the heavy oak door and ushered me inside. The workshop was a maze of benches, drawers, and hanging tools. Clocks of every kind covered the walls, their ticks and tocks layering into a restless heartbeat. "Put the atlas there," he said, pointing to a low table in the center of the room. I set it down, but before I could take my hands away, the brass cover warmed under my palms. It opened. Slowly, like it was waking on its own. A new mark was there. Not a place, not even a shape I could name, just a single line of black thread running down the page, anchored at one end. And at the other end, I saw letters. My name. "Mara," Caspar said softly, coming to stand beside me. "This isn't possible." The thread pulsed faintly, and with each pulse, I felt a tug, not on my body, but somewhere deeper, a pull toward something. Someone. My skin prickled. "What does it mean?" "It means a cutter has found a loose thread in you," Caspar said. "They're unpicking your life from the inside out." My voice was smaller than I meant it to be. "What happens if they finish?" "They'll be able to edit you," he said. "Your memories, your choices, the very order of your moments. And once they've changed one thing, they can change anything," I finished. Caspar's jaw tightened. "We need to follow it to the other end and sew it shut. But this isn't like stitching a river knot or an anchor. This will lead inside your own time." I stared at the atlas. The thread shimmered faintly, and in the shimmer, I thought I saw flashes, me as a child in my mother's workshop, me sitting at the river's edge, me walking away from a grave. The images shifted too quickly to hold. "How do we follow it?" Caspar reached for the humming bronze key in my pocket, his fingers careful. "This will open you to yourself," he said. "But once we step in, there's no pausing. If the cutter is there, they'll fight to keep the edit." The workshop seemed to tilt around me. The clocks on the walls all stopped at once. The air thickened, expectant. I put my hand over the key. "Then we go now." Caspar nodded once. He turned the key in the lock at the center of the atlas page, and light spilled out, not warm light, but the silver gray of dawn before anything moves. It curled upward, folding into a doorway just wide enough for a person. Beyond it, I saw a street I knew but didn't, my childhood street, but cleaner, sharper, as if drawn from memory rather than photograph. Somewhere inside it, I knew, Winterloo was already pulling at the other end of my thread. Caspar stepped through first. I followed. The doorway closed behind us with the sound of a watch snapping shut. The air inside my own time was heavier than I expected, thick with the scent of warm bread from a bakery that had been gone for 20 years. The street shone after rain, each cobblestone sharper, more vivid than in life. Caspar glanced around, eyes moving like a locksmith's, looking for what didn't belong. The thread was visible here, not as a line on a page, but a real thing, black and taut, stretching down the street. It vibrated faintly under my gaze, leading past familiar houses to a doorway I had never seen before. Winterloo stood there, holding the other end. He wasn't smiling now. "Do you know what it is yet?" he asked, his voice carrying in the strange stillness. "The moment I'm cutting?" I didn't answer. I knew if I asked, I'd want it. He tugged the thread once, and the world around us flickered. The bakery window emptied of bread. A cat that had been perched on a windowsill vanished. My stomach dropped, the edits were starting. Caspar stepped forward, but Winter lifted one pale finger, and Caspar froze mid-stride, locked like a clock with no pendulum. "It's small," Winter said, looking only at me. "Just one change. You never leave that workshop the day she died. You're there in time to call for help. She lives another 19 years. You fix clocks together. You never open the atlas." The thread between us thrummed, tempting, alive. I could see it, my mother's laughter, the smell of solder and lemon oil, years we never had. It felt so real I almost stepped toward him. But then, in the periphery of that vision, I saw other things. Clocks stopped forever. Streets rotting under empty skies. My own hands, older, paler, signing papers for Winterloo. My voice shook, but I spoke anyway. "That's not saving her. That's replacing her with something you own." His expression cooled. "Then you'll lose her twice." I took out the needle. My hands felt slow, as though I were sewing underwater. Winter pulled harder on the thread, and the world blurred again, half of Caspar's frozen figure vanished into static. One stitch. Two. My fingers burned where the thread bit into them, but I kept going, binding the loose end back into the weave of my life. With every loop, the bakery reappeared, the cat returned to its windowsill, Caspar's coat regained its color. Winterloo's hands tightened on the thread. "You don't even know what you're preserving." "I know it's mine," I said, and tied the final knot. The thread went slack. Winter's form wavered, breaking into thin lines like a frayed film reel, and then he was gone. The street shimmered, colors dimming back to the dull palette of memory. Caspar staggered forward, free again, his face pale. "You stitched it?" "Yes," I said, though my voice didn't feel like mine. The doorway back to the workshop opened behind us, waiting. We stepped through. The atlas lay on the table, closed, its brass cover cool. The black thread with my name was gone. Caspar looked at me for a long time. "He'll try again." "I know," I said. I glanced at the clocks on the walls. They had started ticking again, but they sounded different now, like they knew my name too. And in the quiet between the ticks, I thought I heard my mother's voice, soft and amused. "Good. Now keep it running." The atlas was still warm when I placed my hand on it. I didn't move it away.